Hey friends, recently I've been reading some stories about wars, and of course I'm going to read another one. Today, this book is called Flight for Freedom. And after World War II, Berlin, which is located in Germany, was divided by the Soviet Union wanted to control it. The US and France and England also wanted to control it. So they ended up putting a wall right down the middle of the city. Think about if someone came into Portland and put a wall right down the middle of Portland. If you lived on one side, you would never be able to cross over. If your family was on the other side, you'd never get to see them again. You weren't allowed to go back and forth. So after World War II, this happened. They built this wall, and if you lived on the Soviet Union side, the east side, your life was very restricted. You couldn't travel. You had to stand in long lines to get food. It was really not a nice way to live. So this book is a true story about a family who had a secret and they decided to escape, which was super, super dangerous. They had guards and they had barbed wire and they would shoot people for trying to escape. But this family did it, and it's a true story. The author's name is Kristen Fulton. The illustrator is Torben Kuhlmann. And here is a picture. Actually, it's in the back. Well, somewhere. Where did it go? Well, I'll show you in a minute. But anyway, here's a picture of Berlin. And this is East Germany. And this is West Germany. And this is the area where this family escaped. And so let me show you. Here's a picture. This is the family. And they escaped in 1979, and the wall in Berlin finally came down in 1991. And so they were able to go to West Germany. They escaped, and they were able to start a new life there. So their named are Peter, Andreas, Petra, and Gunther Wetzel. This is shortly after they escaped East Germany, and they were starting their life in West Germany in 1979. In the days when Germany was divided by a wall, life was very different. For nearly 900 miles, concrete and steel sliced through the country. Can you imagine having that in the middle of your city? And like I said, if you lived on the east side, you were not allowed to go anywhere. You weren't allowed to travel. You weren't allowed to see your family if they lived on the west side. It was really terrible. On the west side, children watched cartoons, wore blue jeans, and ate pizza. On the east side, children watched the news, wore scratchy uniforms, and waited in long lines for a banana once a year. Can you imagine? You'd only get a banana one time a year, and you'd have to wait in line for it. The kids had to wear uniforms. It was a completely different life. 6-year-old Peter Wetzel understood the difference. He lived on the wrong side, the east side. Every night at 9 o'clock, the lights went out in every house in East Germany. It was the law. So they told you when to turn your lights off. At 9 o'clock at night, you could not have your lights on after 9 o'clock at night. But tonight, a small candle danced, throwing shadows against a picture torn from a West German newspaper. Peter's hands shook as he looked at the image of people in a hot air balloon. He knew why his mama and papa had kept it hidden under their mattress. The picture was illegal. Peter also knew that it was part of Mama and Papa's secret plans. Have you ever seen a hot air balloon? They're super cool. So his parents have a plan to escape Germany in a hot air balloon. Now, that's very risky because they could all be killed. And if they weren't killed, they would be put in jail. As the wind whistled outside the window on a cold night in 1978, Peter's life was about to change forever. Peter watched as his family sat around the table with their best friends, the Strelzics, sorry, it's hard to pronounce, and hatched a plan. He listened as his papa and mama discussed what they needed. Almost 200 yards of fabric, heavy-duty thread, fuel, scrap metal to make a basket large enough to hold both families. They had to succeed. Now, just the fact that they were discussing this was totally against the law, and if anybody found out about it, they would be in very serious, serious trouble. Can you imagine living someplace where you weren't allowed to leave, and the government told you what you could do, when you could get food, where you could get food, and when you had to turn off your lights? It's crazy. Even if they all kept their secret, this escape wouldn't be easy. The government noticed everything. Now listen, the government would listen to your phone calls and read your mail. Month after month, Mama purchased only a few yards of nylon fabric at a time. Week after week, Papa purchased just a couple of gallons of fuel at a time. And day after day, Peter walked to school in his starched uniform. He passed soldiers carrying rifles and big dogs that barked and growled. So think about if you, I know we're not walking to school right now, but think about when you used to walk to school if you did. And there would be guards with guns on the corners and dogs that were really ferocious. And they would be all over the city watching people and making sure they didn't do anything they weren't supposed to. Every night for more than a year, Peter lay on his bed watching the light from Papa's welding flicker underneath his bedroom door. His eyes fluttered closed as he was lulled to sleep by the put-put-put of the sewing machine up in the attic. So they had to hide everything. If they were caught doing this, like I said, they would be in big trouble. So his dad in the middle of the night is sewing a hot air balloon. Each morning when Peter woke, he expected to find proof that his parents were building a balloon, but the house was exactly as it had been the day before. Everything hidden, everything quiet. They couldn't risk leaving it out overnight at all. What if somebody came? What if the police came in the day to inspect them? What if someone told their secret? Peter wondered if the photo had been only a dream. Would he ever escape East Germany, have a sleepover, not be afraid? He wanted to ask his mama and papa, but they had made him promise never to talk about the picture. Hard as it was, Peter kept his promise. So at this point, he's probably about 7 years old. Even if he told a friend at school, the whole family could be arrested. Just past midnight on September 16, 1979, Peter's parents gently shook him awake. It was time. Now they have to leave everything behind. They're not going to be taking probably anything. Maybe he gets to take one toy. I'm not sure. We'll see. But it's just, they're very brave to try to do this. And it's super dangerous. They tiptoed outside, each bringing one small knapsack. Piling into their car, they tried to close the doors softly. But like a clap of thunder, the sharp clicks echoed throughout the calm night. As the car crept forward, Peter stared backward and whispered goodbye. The weather was perfect. The thick clouds would help hide them. With luck, the wind would blow them toward the west to freedom. I mean, it's hard for me to explain what a huge deal this is. Like I said, they could be killed. If the police saw them, the soldiers saw them, they could shoot the balloon out of the sky. They could arrest them. I mean, it's very brave to leave everything behind. This is how unhappy and restricted their life was, that they were ready to risk everything to start a new life in a country with freedom. They stopped the car in a huge field surrounded by a thick cluster of trees. Peter helped to unload the balloon, gas tanks, and giant blowtorch. He held the side of the balloon while the others used the blowtorch to heat the air. Peter watched as the warm air slowly stretched the fabric to look more like a balloon. Would this bundle of mismatched fabric even make it over the wall? That's huge. So his dad had been sewing that every night for like a year. I mean, it's crazy when you think about it. It's incredible. So what happens is the hot air heats, I mean, it's hot, and it goes inside the balloon and it blows it up. A siren wailed in the distance. The Stasi, I guess that's what they call their soldiers or police. Peter's heart pounded. How did the police find out? He had kept his promise. He hadn't told a soul. Someone must have tattled on them. So look, you can just see the balloon, and there are the police. I have no idea how they found out. Peter's fingers gripped the nylon fabric tighter as the last puff of air inflated the balloon. Billowing off the ground, the balloon stood taller than the trees. Trembling with fear and excitement, they all scurried into the basket. Now, hot air balloons are cool, but they depend on the wind, they depend on the heat inside the balloon, and they can crash, and it's also very dangerous, just the balloon itself. Papa handed a knife to Peter and told him to cut the rope, their last tie to East Germany. The knife trembled in Peter's hand. The barking guard dogs were getting closer. Peter sawed back and forth against the tightly woven rope, bit by bit, shred by shred, breaking through the rope and breaking free. I wonder how the police found out. I wonder if someone saw them leaving. See, that's the thing, is that neighbors would tell on each other, They would call the police if they saw something suspicious, and maybe their neighbor saw them leaving and called the police. The balloon climbed. And also, there's probably 4 or 5 kids and 4 parents, because there are 2 families. It's a lot of weight in that balloon. And look how big that is. Can you imagine sewing that in your attic? And here come the police. So when they get to freedom, they're not going to have anything. They're not going to have a car. They're not going to have a house. They're not going to have any jobs. They're not going to have anything. Higher, higher. They had to get higher. Peter watched as the needle on the meter moved. So you can control how high you go by how much hot air you release into the balloon. "1,000 feet. A distant spotlight broke the night. 2,000 feet. Guards spilled into the forest where they had just been. 3,000 feet. The balloon began to tear. 4,000 feet, 2 of their 6 gas tanks were empty. 5,000 feet, 4 empty gas tanks. 6,000 feet, so they're really, really high in the sky. The last tank of gas sputtered. The balloon descended too fast." That's the other problem. So they could have a crash landing. And so the balloon is tearing also. It takes a lot of really, really thick thread to keep that in place. The balloon fell faster and faster. Peter's stomach churned and turned. They had only been in the air for 30 minutes. Papa didn't think they had gone far enough to cross the wall. If they hadn't, he knew they would be seized, separated, and sent to prison. Peter cried as they plummeted. So at this point, they don't know if they're going to make it to the wall. And if they don't, they're going to be in big, big trouble because the police already know about it, and so they're going to be searching for them. They crashed to the ground in a thicket of trees. Lights beamed in the distance, heading in their direction. Peter feared they were caught. Scrambling behind trees, they stifled their voices, sweating even in the cold. The lights washed over their hiding place and zoomed right past them. It was only a car, but Peter had never seen a car that looked like that. Papa's voice quivered as he explained that it wasn't just any car. That was a West German car. They did it. They actually did it. So they had sailed across the wall, but in all the trying to make the balloon stay up and keep everybody safe, they hadn't noticed that they'd gone far enough, so they were on the other side. Now they're in freedom. Emerging from the trees one by one, they walked toward town. The night passed in slow motion. Each step carried them farther away from the 900 miles of concrete and steel. Papa pulled a surprise from his knapsack. With a spark and a toss, firecrackers exploded across the West German sky, and Peter and his family celebrated. So his dad had brought fireworks as a celebration if they made it. So here's a real picture of the balloon that they made out of fabric that they bought. I can't imagine how they did this. And here they are. That's Peter and his little brother. And this is what the basket of the balloon looked like, which isn't very sturdy. That'd be easy to fall. So this tells you more about how they made the balloon, the size of it, what they used, how they made the gondola. The gondola is the basket that they sit in or stood up in, and the temperature you need to make the balloon work. Here is some more information about the escape attempts. I guess they maybe had tried to escape before. And here's a note from the author. There's a lot of great information in this book. I think it's super interesting. I know I've been reading these books about wars, and this happened after World War II. And this gives you some history on the Cold War and the Berlin Wall and what happened. So in 1991, the wall finally completely was torn down. Here's another picture of the map showing the wall right here. I think it's super interesting for us to learn about history, and it's important because we don't want things like this to keep happening. And if you're educated and you know history, then you can be someone who helps keep bad things from happening. Anyway, I hope you like this story. Happy reading, friends.